There is a kind of silence that feels louder than any conversation. Two people who once exchanged messages, shared emotions, and felt connected suddenly become strangers again. No calls, no texts, no explanation, just the empty space where communication used to exist. At first, that silence can feel unbearable. You keep checking your phone, wondering whether they will finally reach out. They don't, and neither do you. Your mind starts replaying everything, every conversation, every moment, every sign you may have missed. You begin questioning yourself. Was I not enough? Did I care too much? Did they ever truly care about me? But slowly something changes. Because silence isn't always the ending. Sometimes it is where transformation begins. When you and an avoidant stop contacting each other, something deeper than communication changes. The emotional pattern between you is interrupted. The chasing stops. The withdrawing stops. The constant tension finally becomes quiet. And once all that noise disappears, both people are left alone with what they have been avoiding. For the avoidant, silence can initially feel like relief. There is no expectation, no difficult conversation, and no emotional pressure. They may tell themselves that having space is exactly what they wanted. Their nervous system settles, and they convince themselves that everything is better this way. But relief is not always peace. Sometimes it is simply avoidance wearing the mask of peace. Once you stop reaching out, they lose the distraction your pursuit provided. There are no messages to ignore, no calls to avoid, and no reassurance they can push away. Eventually, their attention turns inward, and questions begin to appear. Did I push away something meaningful? Why do I feel their absence so strongly? Why am I thinking about them when I was the one who wanted distance? Avoidance doesn't necessarily mean a person feels nothing. Sometimes it means they are frightened by what they feel. Emotional closeness can activate old fears of losing freedom, being overwhelmed, or being hurt. So they create distance because distance makes them feel safer. But when you stop chasing, that familiar distance changes. Now they have to experience the consequences of it. They may bury themselves in work, hobbies, entertainment, or other distractions. They may appear completely fine, but when everything becomes quiet, memories can return. Your voice, your laugh, the little things you did, the feeling of being understood. Most importantly, they may remember that you saw parts of them that they usually kept hidden, and that can be difficult to escape. Meanwhile, something important is happening inside you too. At first, the silence may trigger panic, sadness, and confusion. But with time, you begin to recognize how much energy you spent trying to receive something that should never have required constant chasing. You realize that constantly pursuing someone wasn't necessarily love. Sometimes it was fear of losing them. When you stop participating in that cycle, your own nervous system begins to settle. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop analyzing every unanswered message. You stop measuring your worth by their attention. Little by little, your energy comes back to you. That is where your real transformation begins. You begin moving from chasing to observing, from overthinking to understanding, and from waiting for them to choosing yourself. And this is where silence becomes powerful. You are no longer withdrawing to punish them. You are stepping back because you refuse to abandon yourself just to keep another person comfortable. That difference matters. Fear creates emotional withdrawal. Self-respect creates healthy distance. When you choose yourself, the old dynamic begins to collapse. The avoidant can no longer depend on your constant availability as proof that you will always be there. The emotional pattern they were comfortable with no longer works. They may start wondering why you aren't reaching out anymore. Are they moving on? Did I finally lose them?
Why does their absence feel so different now? Those questions can create an internal conflict. Part of them may still crave distance, while another part begins missing the connection. They may remember moments they once took for granted. They might look at your social media, revisit old memories, think about sending a message, or imagine what would happen if they reached out. They may act on those feelings, or they may continue resisting them. Either way, the silence has changed something.
For you, the silence becomes a path back to yourself. You begin rediscovering your confidence, your peace, your identity, and the parts of yourself that became smaller while trying to maintain the connection. For them, the silence can become a mirror. Without your pursuit, they have fewer places to hide from their own emotions. They may finally begin recognizing that the connection wasn't simply pressure. There was genuine care there. There was consistency. There was someone who tried to understand them. And sometimes you don't recognize the value of someone's presence until their absence gives you something to compare it with. That is why the silence between you is not necessarily about revenge, punishment, or making someone chase you. It's about breaking a pattern that was hurting you. Love cannot remain healthy when one person is constantly reaching while the other constantly retreats. A relationship cannot grow when one person carries all the emotional responsibility. When both people stop, the imbalance becomes visible. You begin to understand what you deserve. And they may begin to understand what their avoidance cost them. That is the deeper meaning of silence. It doesn't guarantee that an avoidant will come back. It doesn't promise a specific outcome. What it does guarantee is an opportunity for both people to see the relationship more clearly. For you, it can become restoration. For them, it can become realization. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to force a connection and allow the silence to reveal the truth. Because when you stop chasing someone, you don't lose your power. You finally take it back. In the beginning of no contact, an avoidant may convince themselves that everything is perfectly fine. They stay busy, find distractions, and tell themselves they never really needed you. But human connection isn't something the mind can simply switch off. Your voice, your presence, your warmth, and the emotional rhythm you created with them became familiar to their nervous system. When that suddenly disappears, the body can notice the absence before the mind is willing to admit it. They may become restless, irritated, distracted, or strangely unsettled without understanding why. Then, during an ordinary moment, it hits them. There is an empty space where your presence used to be. The silence that once felt peaceful begins to feel strangely lonely. And slowly, an uncomfortable truth starts becoming clear. They didn't escape pressure. They lost connection. For many avoidants, closeness can activate old fears. Somewhere along the way, they may have learned that intimacy means losing control, being overwhelmed, or becoming emotionally trapped. Distance then becomes their protection. But what they often fail to understand is that love doesn't chase endlessly. Eventually, the person who kept reaching out becomes tired and steps back. And when that happens, the same wall that once made them feel safe can leave them completely isolated. They may begin missing the way you understood them without judging them, the patience you showed during difficult moments, and the way you could give them space without completely abandoning the connection. Avoiding intimacy doesn't mean someone stops needing connection. It often means they have learned to deny that need. But denial doesn't destroy emotion. It only postpones the moment when emotion demands attention. So in the quiet, memories begin returning. Old conversations replay in their mind. Things they dismissed suddenly seem important. They may remember your last message and wonder what would have happened if they had responded differently. Meanwhile,
something completely different begins happening inside you. The absence starts creating clarity.
You stop accepting small pieces of affection just because you're afraid of losing the whole person. You begin understanding that your worth was never determined by how someone responded to your love. Silence stops looking like rejection and starts looking like a path leading you back to yourself. Your days become calmer. You sleep better. You think less about your phone. You slowly stop living inside the emotional roller coaster of waiting, hoping, and wondering. You begin feeling like yourself again. And that emotional independence changes the entire dynamic. Your energy no longer says, "Please choose me." It begins saying, "I choose peace." That shift can create curiosity in the avoidant. They may wonder whether you've moved on, whether you're happier without them, or whether you still think about them. Curiosity can gradually become longing, not necessarily because they have suddenly healed, but because they are finally experiencing the contrast between your presence and your absence. They may try to find something similar elsewhere, but some connections cannot simply be duplicated. What made your connection meaningful may have been the emotional depth, the feeling of being understood, and the safety of being seen beyond their defenses. With enough time, distractions lose their power, and the absence becomes harder to ignore. For you, however, no contact becomes something deeper than missing someone. It becomes emotional detox. You weren't necessarily addicted to the person. You were attached to the cycle, the chasing, waiting, uncertainty, hope, anxiety, and occasional reassurance. You may have mistaken intensity for intimacy and inconsistency for passion. Now that the cycle has stopped, the nervous system has to learn a new rhythm. At first, peace can feel uncomfortable because chaos was familiar. You may even miss the emotional highs and lows. But gradually you discover something important. Peace was never boring. It simply felt unfamiliar. You begin recognizing that some of what you called love was actually survival. You were overthinking, overgiving, and overextending yourself in an attempt to secure connection. You believed more effort would eventually make someone choose you. Then silence teaches you something no explanation could. You should never have to abandon yourself to be loved. Your questions begin changing. Instead of asking, "Why didn't they choose me?" you start asking, "Why did I keep choosing someone who couldn't meet me emotionally?" That question opens the door to healing. You realize your attachment wasn't only about them. It was also connected to the part of you that believed love had to be earned through patience, sacrifice, and constant effort. Once you recognize that pattern, you become free to break it. You stop watching your phone for proof that you matter. You stop allowing their responses to determine your mood. You stop tolerating uncertainty simply because you're afraid of losing them. You weren't weak. You were trying to heal through a familiar pattern of pain. And now you're waking up. Your attention returns to your goals, your confidence, your peace, and your self-respect. You stop trying to convince someone to value you and begin building a life you genuinely value yourself. You move from reaction to creation, from seeking closure to becoming your own closure. Eventually, their silence no longer controls your emotions. You don't feel whole because they returned. You feel whole because you returned to yourself. That is the real transformation. And ironically, this can be the stage when an avoidant begins feeling the strongest pull. Not because silence is a manipulation, but because your emotional dependence is gone. You are no longer asking them to complete you. You've become grounded within yourself. At the same time, the avoidant may begin realizing that what they called independence was sometimes simply fear disguised as strength. They thought distance would create peace, but distance only removed communication.
It never removed emotion.
The more time passes, the more difficult it becomes to hide behind logic. They may remember you unexpectedly. They may quietly check your social media, wonder how you're doing, or imagine reaching out. They might never act on those feelings, but internally, something has changed. They begin recognizing a painful truth. They didn't escape a problem. They may have walked away from something genuine because they weren't emotionally prepared to receive it. And this can become the beginning of real self-reflection. They may finally notice how often they push away people who care about them, how quickly they interpret closeness as pressure, and how often they destroy peaceful connections because emotional distance feels safer. Avoidance isn't always rooted in cruelty. Often it comes from old emotional wounds and learned defenses. But healing requires facing those wounds instead of allowing them to control every relationship. Your role is different now. You're no longer waiting for them to understand you. You're no longer trying to force them into vulnerability. You've learned to release without hatred and protect your peace without needing revenge. Whether they admit it or not, that difference matters. Because eventually, control stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like isolation. You cannot silence emotions by ignoring them. You cannot create genuine peace by constantly running from vulnerability. And you cannot protect yourself from love without also protecting yourself from the connection you secretly need. When the noise finally disappears, the truth becomes much harder to avoid. And that is when silence stops being the enemy. It becomes the teacher. For you, it teaches self-worth, boundaries, and emotional freedom. For them, it can become a mirror showing them everything they once avoided. And sometimes, the greatest transformation begins when there is finally nothing left to chase, nothing left to prove, and no one left to distract you from the truth. But real peace doesn't come from simply creating distance. It comes from understanding what is happening within you. And as the silence continues, the avoidant may slowly recognize something they never wanted to face. The wall they built for protection has also become a prison. The emptiness they feel isn't freedom. It's information. It's showing them that their old way of coping isn't working anymore. They may begin realizing that connection was never truly the enemy. Their fear of vulnerability was. Running away wasn't necessarily strength. It was a survival response they learned long ago. And eventually, they may start questioning more than the relationship. They may begin questioning the pattern itself. Why do I pull away whenever someone gets close? Why do I push away people who genuinely care? Why does intimacy make me feel unsafe? Avoidance usually has a deeper origin. Somewhere in the past, love may have become connected with disappointment, pressure, rejection, or emotional pain. In the quiet, memories and feelings that were buried beneath years of defense can begin rising to the surface. That is where genuine change can begin. Not necessarily through dramatic apologies or sudden declarations, but through awareness. They may finally understand that the love you offered wasn't an attempt to control them. You were simply trying to connect. The distance they once believed would protect them has now created the loneliness they were trying to avoid. But this transformation isn't only theirs. It belongs to you too. For you, the end of contact can become the beginning of reconnecting with yourself. Your attention slowly returns from them to you. The energy once consumed by waiting, analyzing, hoping, and questioning begins becoming available again. You start hearing your own thoughts. You start trusting your own feelings. You begin feeling parts of yourself that had been buried beneath emotional uncertainty. And then you discover something powerful. Perhaps you weren't only chasing love, Perhaps you were chasing a sense of safety. You were trying to repair an emotional story that began long before this relationship. You were hoping that if this person finally chose you, understood you, or stayed, it would somehow prove that you were worthy of being loved. Once you see that pattern, everything changes. You no longer need them to give you closure because you begin creating closure within yourself. The relationship becomes less about what you lost and more about what it revealed. It showed you where you were abandoning your boundaries, where you were overgiving, and where you were searching outside yourself for something you needed to build within. Silence becomes a teacher. It teaches patience. It teaches boundaries. It teaches emotional independence. Most importantly, it teaches you how to release someone without losing yourself in the process. You stop waiting for their return. You stop trying to predict what they're thinking. You stop allowing their choices to determine your emotional state. And slowly, you begin choosing peace over uncertainty. That's when transformation becomes real. It doesn't happen because they come back. It happens because you come back to yourself.
Your worth no longer depends on their presence.
Your peace isn't controlled by whether they send a message. You finally understand that love was never supposed to require constant struggle, chasing, or proving yourself. Love should have room for authenticity. For the avoidant, the silence may reveal that avoidance isn't the same thing as safety. Sometimes it is simply separation disguised as protection. For you, it reveals that no relationship is worth sacrificing your self-respect. Some avoidants will eventually reach out. Others may remain silent. Some may reflect and grow, while others may continue repeating the same pattern. But that isn't your responsibility anymore.
Your healing cannot depend on what they decide to do. Your healing depends on what you choose to do with your own life. So don't fear the silence. Allow it to teach you. Feel what you need to feel, but don't allow temporary pain to convince you that you've lost your future. Sometimes an ending isn't a punishment. Sometimes it's a redirection. When contact ends, many people assume the story is finished. But an ending can also be a recalibration. It removes the constant emotional noise and gives you the space to see what was hidden beneath it. The silence may expose your fears, your attachments, your habits, and your deepest insecurities. But it can also reveal your strength. It can remind you who you were before you became consumed by someone else's uncertainty. No contact isn't supposed to destroy you. It's an opportunity to awaken. The pain often becomes heavier when you fight against reality. But when you stop resisting what has already happened, something inside you begins to soften. You realize you don't have to chase someone who is running. You don't have to rescue someone who isn't ready to face themselves. You don't have to keep bleeding beside someone simply because you love them. You can love someone and still choose yourself. And every tear, every difficult night, every unanswered question can become part of your growth. None of it has to be wasted. Eventually, you begin seeing the difference between solitude and loneliness, between peace and emptiness, between attachment and genuine connection. Your absence may also speak louder than your words ever did. It communicates something simple. You are no longer willing to negotiate your worth. That is when you move from attachment into awareness. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is simply rejected and start seeing yourself as someone who has the power to rebuild. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can release without bitterness. You can understand someone's wounds without making those wounds your responsibility. The avoidant isn't necessarily your enemy. Their unresolved fear is the problem, and you cannot heal another person by destroying yourself beside them. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is step away and allow both people to face their own lessons. So if you and an avoidant have stopped contacting each other, don't immediately label it as tragedy. See it as a turning point. You are not necessarily being abandoned. You may be being redirected towards something healthier. You are not being rejected. You are being reminded that your worth should never depend on someone else's ability to recognize it. The silence may feel cold now, but it can become the space where clarity, confidence, and self-respect are forged. One day, you'll look back at this chapter and understand that it wasn't really about losing someone. It was about finding yourself again. The silence didn't destroy you. It brought you back home to yourself.
And if this message reached something inside you today, remember this: silence is not always the end. Sometimes it is the bridge between the person you were and the person you're becoming. Don't chase what chose to run. Don't beg for closure. Become your own closure. You are not defined by who walked away. You are defined by what you do after they leave. So breathe deeply. Stand tall. Let peace become your strength. Keep growing, keep healing, and keep choosing yourself. Because one day you'll look back at this silence and realize it wasn't the moment your story ended. It was the moment your new life began. Thank you for being here, for doing the inner work, and for choosing yourself even when it was difficult. Stay grounded, keep growing, and remember, silence isn't where your story ends. It's where your transformation begins.